This week on Crossroads Politics, the future of Indiana's schools.
If you vote to divide our tax dollars, you are voting to divide our communities.
From property taxes,
I think teachers, firefighters, and police officers are very important.
to sharing money with charters
We are for dollars following students.
and partisan school board races.
We should pick school board members based on their skills, experience, and what they stand for, not their political party.
What we heard from more than 100 Hoosiers who came out this week to voice their classroom concerns. Plus,
Laws are written in black and white. The real world is very gray.
what's the line between police safety and accountability? How lawmakers are trying to tweak Indiana's encroachment law that's already held up in the courts. And big moves in Washington are having an impact here in Indiana, from government buildings possibly up for sale to a new trade war with our biggest partners.
Yeah, we know that when tariffs go into effect, farmers are usually the first to feel the negative impacts of that.
How the big moves in Washington are changing our lives right here. Thanks for joining us on Crossroads Politics here on WTHR Plus this week. I'm Dustin Grove. After a one-week break, we are back, and so are lawmakers, tackling some of the top priorities for the session, and that includes property tax reform. Emily Longnecker is at the State House, where a lot of people turned out to speak on that issue this week. For hours, they waited to talk. Emily?
Hours, Dustin. It was a rare crowd out here Wednesday night, actually on this floor, the fourth floor of the State House building, right here in this hallway that you see behind me, outside the House Ways and Means Committee. 160 people signed up to testify. There were two bills being heard, but 40 of those people that signed up to testify were here to testify and talk about SB 1, the property tax relief bill.
Teacher, taxpayer, and father, Luke Bodges is a lot of things to a lot of people. All of them reasons to come to the State House Wednesday, just to wait for hours to testify.
I need to make sure my schools are good, I need to make sure my job is secure, and I need to make sure my property taxes are low.
Bodges is concerned about the funding cuts to schools and local governments that would come with SB 1, the property tax relief bill.
I'm all for cutting property taxes, but I want to make sure our community resources are funded. I think teachers, firefighters, and police officers are very important.
There's no other revenue streams for us.
Julie Wendorf is the director of a library in Lake County. Under the Senate's version of SB 1, Wendorf says her library would have to cut services and reduce hours.
Libraries do a lot in their communities. It's more than just checking out books.
But if Wendorf's worried about SB 1 in its current form, she says the governor's version would be worse where many libraries are concerned.
We would be shutting doors. There are probably a lot of rural libraries that have to shut their doors.
In today's hearing, SB 1's author, Republican Senator Travis Holdman, acknowledged the bill is far from being in its final form. Holdman's focus, though, more relief for the homeowner.
I'm not telling you this is a perfect bill, and we're looking for some collaboration with this body on this side to make it even better than what it is. And if that means more relief for homestead property owners, I think you would find that we're open to have that discussion.
And one reason that Senate Republicans open to having that discussion, you'll remember that Governor Braun has threatened to veto SB 1 or call a special session if lawmakers arrive at a version of this bill that he is not comfortable with. Now, House Speaker Todd Houston saying earlier this week that he is confident that they can get to a version that the governor will be happy with. This week, lawmakers just heard from the public. The House has not offered any amendments yet on this bill. Dustin?
Obviously, a lot of emotion there, as we heard, but that bill wasn't even the biggest draw, was it?
Right. No, it wasn't. It actually, I don't want to say it took a back seat, but you know, we said before, it was a marathon session out here Wednesday night, and the big draw was Senate Bill 518, and that is the bill that would see public schools sharing revenue that's raised through a referenda with public charter schools. More than 100 people signed up to testify on 518, and testify they did. Take a listen.
Charter school students deserve the same resources as any other public school student. They don't need to take the funds away from our district schools. If you vote to divide our tax dollars, you are voting to divide our communities.
And I'm asking for fairness in funding just to make sure that our kids have the same opportunities as every other students throughout the state. And I really feel like a lot of this is being passed because they see that IPS is making a comeback. and they want to try to bring us back down.
You've got a lot of kids that are going to charter schools now, and those maybe 60% of the kids in the IPS system, for instance, that aren't getting the benefit of any of those dollars.
Lawmakers are claiming that this is about fairness, but if it was truly about fairness, then why is the state cutting charter school funding?
Right now, when a student goes to a charter school, their tuition money through the state follows them. But if the school district passes a referendum to pay for a new building, for example, the referendum money stays with the district because it isn't divided up by student. Under SB 518, that would change, giving charter schools some of the referenda dollars proportional to the students who attend the charter school. And schools, don't pick a number out of a hat when they ask for a specific amount of money. So basically, if they have to share money now with charter schools, they would have to ask for a property tax increase so that they would still be getting the same amount. Now, that committee hearing here started at 1:30 on Wednesday afternoon. It didn't wrap up until after 10 o'clock. Dustin?
And Emily, the passion on this issue is not limited to just the State House either, right? We've seen this playing out in other places too.
Yeah, listen, it is one of the reasons that Indianapolis City County Councilor Jesse Brown says that he was kicked out of the Democratic caucus. Brown cited debate over this issue, this sharing of the money between public schools and charter schools that led to the confrontation that got him voted out of the caucus. Brown accused Dems of siding with charters over public schools, and he actually pointed out the relationship some of his fellow Democratic councilors have with charter school organizations around Indiana. Now, in a statement, the Democratic caucus said that a successful caucus, quote, must rely on trust, factual discourse, and a commitment to constructive teamwork. In the meantime, Brown, a Democratic socialist, has remained outspoken on the issue. Dustin?
Yeah, and Emily, Nikki actually grabbed a picture of a member of the Democratic Socialists of Indiana who sat through the entire hearing for SB 518 with a shirt that read, "No SB 518, less pie equals fewer slices." Nikki, 9 hours of testimony, probably not a record for the State House, but not common either.
It's up there. I can maybe think of one other bill that went on that long. But yeah, it was, and technically it was two bills, but the overarching concern is, taking property tax dollars from public schools. And so both bills would do it in different ways.
Is there a way to take the barometer of how lawmakers took that, the gravity of the length of testimony?
Ooh, it was split between for and against, much more against than for. And I think lawmakers have been very understanding that they can't do as much as the governor wants because that would just decimate local government budgets. That doesn't mean that they don't think there are some changes that need to be made and that some local units, some schools might be spending a bit too extravagantly.
You have covered the Capitol Chronicle property taxes extensively. The Capitol Chronicle actually had a really interesting article about another wrinkle to this whole debate, how lower commercial property values are pushing more of the tax burden onto homeowners. Is that right?
Yeah, and we looked at some numbers from 2019 to 2024, and it's not that commercial businesses still aren't seeing their property taxes go up. They are, but they're not going up at the same rate as homeowners' property taxes.
Okay.
So overall, homeowners are paying a bigger piece of the pie than commercial properties, and that came up in that hearing a number of times.
Well, let's show our viewers what you're talking about here, just to kind of give you some perspective. In Marion County in 2019, homesteads paid about 45% of the county's property taxes. But by 2024, that had gone up to 50%. If you put it another way, taxes on commercial and industrial properties made up just over half of the total collected in 2019, but then last year it was less than 42% of the taxes collected. So SB 1 focuses on homesteads. Do you see lawmakers looking at this whole difference between commercials and residentials and coming up with something else?
I think they're definitely getting concerned. The issue is that homes change hands a lot, right?
Commercial doesn't.
When you're basing your assessed value, you can get brand new sales, but commercial property just doesn't move as much, and so it's harder, and it's on a more like 3 to 4 year cycle than homes. And so I do think that has come into the conversation this half. I'm not sure what they can do about it because that's the way the system is designed. But, you know, I think people are noticing that the burden is shifting to homeowners, and that's becoming a problem.
Well, lawmakers certainly heard hours of testimony about that. All right, to another issue now. How well do you know who's running for your local school board? A bill at the State House wants to make school board members declare a political party. But that bill has faced bipartisan opposition as well. Emily?
Yeah, Dustin, the bill passed out of the Senate with a slim margin. And, you know, when you think about it, school boards really have a lot of power, right? They decide what books are in your kids' school library. They set the curriculum. They also decide the dress code. And in recent years, these school board races have become increasingly partisan, with a lot of outside money pouring in from donors and organizations that are not even directly tied to Indiana. And right now, when you run for school board, you do not have to list a party affiliation. So when voters go into the voter booth, they don't see a party affiliation. 287 would change that.
Lawmakers in a House committee heard testimony on the bill today. The proposed measure has already faced some opposition from both Republican and Democratic lawmakers and just narrowly passed out of the Senate in the first half of session. The bill's author, Republican State Senator Gary Byrne, believes listing a school board candidate's political party on the ballot would give voters more transparency.
Knowing which political party a candidate identifies with will help Hoosiers know what kind of principles that person would apply to their position on the school board. School boards are already partisan, and it's more vital than ever that we recognize that.
More than 40 people signed up to testify today, with no shortage of takes on both sides of the issue.
This bill would also allow school board candidates to run in a primary, which gives the candidates running more time to get to the finer points of their campaign. The transparency this bill gives and allows the voter the opportunity to make a more confident and accurate decision in the voting booth.
SB 287 will crush the hopes of people my age and younger people who want to help but don't want to get tangled in partisan politics. We should pick school board members based on their skills, experience, and what they stand for, not their political party. I don't even know what
And testimony went on for several hours on this bill, but we still don't know its fate. The committee did not take a vote on it yet. Dustin?
All right, Emily, thank you. Nikki, I'm just remembering growing up here in central Indiana in the 80s and 90s. I don't recall, granted I was a child, so I wasn't attuned to politics, but I don't remember hearing that school board elections were partisan years ago.
They've definitely become more bitter and partisan, I think since COVID. That's when we started to see it all. But I do have to push back a little in the sense of, I think in all but a handful of districts, they're still perfectly fine. They're not causing any problems. But, you know, when a central Indiana race or two capture attention, then suddenly we have a bill. But I think in the vast majority of the state, these school boards are operating just fine. People are fine with the way they're being elected. And that, I think you saw in the vote in the Senate, which was real tight. And, you know, we might see a vote in this House too. I'm not for sure it'll pass. It's still very controversial, and it's not particularly, you know, there are people for and against it on both sides.
Okay, I know you'll continue to follow it, Nikki. Thank you. You know, education is the single biggest expense for the state of Indiana. Lawmakers are trying to tackle a lot of issues around it. On top of the bills we've just talked about, they're also looking into limiting social media access for kids and reforming a huge chunk of the education code. It is a lot to understand, but thankfully Alex Appleton with Chalkbeat Indiana is here. She's been following these bills very closely. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start off with the biggest of these bills, maybe the biggest this session. House Bill 1002 is huge. It's called Various Education Matters, so you know it's going to be big.
They
it's
all
about
are, yes.
135 pages. What do people need to know about it?
Well, I heard this week that it cut something like 30,000 words out of Indiana education code. And what the primary point is to remove redundancies and to remove mays from the Education Code with author Bob Baining saying that you don't have to tell schools they may do something, you should tell them they shall. And what's really interesting about this bill is that it's apparently part of a multi-year attempt to remove some of these regulations from Indiana code. And just this week, Baining said to expect more to come in future years. So think of this as step one, and what it's doing is removing some of these things that we have in other parts of code or that we don't need to tell schools what to do. But there are some provisions of it that are pretty controversial, and one of them is that the state superintendent of education, who's now the secretary of education, no longer has to live in Indiana to be considered for the position and doesn't have to have education leadership experience. The rationale for this is that it's now an appointed position rather than an elected one, and it's up to the governor to choose a qualified person.
No matter where that person lives.
Exactly, yes,
Okay.
right.
All right. Let's talk about Senate Bill 11, limiting access to social media for kids. This one passed with bipartisan support.
Sure.
What does it do?
So this would essentially ban any minor under 16 from making a social media account without their parents' permission. So for those younger teenagers, they would need to have a parent verify their identity first and then give permission to the social media operator for the minor to make an account.
This seems similar in some ways to the pornography bill that passed last year requiring users to prove they were 18. That bill survived some legal challenges. Do you expect a bill on social media to have a tougher time in the courts?
The issue is that other states have tried this, and it's been challenged immediately by trade groups who've basically said it's an infringement of minors' free speech rights. And the courts have mostly agreed, and they have blocked the laws from going into effect in those states.
Are there any other education bills right now that you think folks need to be paying attention to?
I think you should pay attention to all the education bills.
Of course.
I think they're all important. There's a big one coming to change math instruction. There's bills moving through on bullying. I would love for everybody to pay attention to them.
Yeah, well, it's a challenge, of course, to cover it all, but you do a great job specifically on education. Check her out, Alex Appleton on Indiana Chalk Beat. Thank you so much for joining us. Come back, okay?
Okay.
All right. Still ahead here on Crossroads Politics.
Yeah, we know that when tariffs go into effect, farmers are usually the first to feel the negative impacts of that.
New tariffs set to go into effect. Some got delayed, others moving forward, but Hoosier businesses, farmers, and consumers were all trying to find the balance in the midst of a growing trade war. And as lawmakers get back to work in the session, the governor gets back to signing executive orders, what they mean for the families of state employees. But first,
Laws are written in black and white. The real world is very gray.
protecting those who protect and serve, or encroaching on free speech. Lawmakers try to fix Indiana's encroachment law. It's already being held at bay by the courts. That's next here on Crossroads Politics. An Indiana law opponents say violates free speech could see some changes. Lawmakers have proposed a bill to change some of the language in the state's so-called encroachment law that passed 2 years ago. So Emily, explain what this bill does.
So the original law created a buffer zone, a 25-foot buffer zone around police doing their work. And there were 2 lawsuits filed against that original law, which led to an injunction from a judge in one of the cases, which means that the law is not currently being enforced right now. But the authors of this current bill say it just adds language to the original law that they believe will take away the vagueness that is alleged in these lawsuits.
As the current law is written, an officer can ask someone to back up 25 feet from an area where police are working at a crime scene or in the process of arresting someone. If the bystander disobeys police commands, they could be arrested and face 60 days behind bars and a $500 fine. The law came under fire in 2 separate lawsuits, one brought by members of a media coalition, including WTHR's parent company, Tegna. That lawsuit argued the law prevented journalists from doing their job and being able to exercise their First Amendment rights. A judge agreed and issued a temporary injunction. The state of Indiana appealed that decision. The case is set to be heard next week. The ACLU also sued on behalf of a citizen journalist. A judge ruled against the ACLU's argument that the law violated the constitutional right to observe and record the police. The ACLU has appealed that decision. Now, House Bill 1122 adds language to the original law, saying an officer can ask someone to back up if they believe that person's presence interferes with the officer's ability to do their job.
Laws are written in black and white. The real world is very gray. So it's up to the officer at that moment to interpret what's going on. And if that person's just casually standing there, it's probably not a situation where the officer is going to be concerned about it, depending on the situation. There are a lot of elements that can come into play there. But if that person's coming up, escalating the scene, trying to cause a little bit more chaos there, that certainly gives the officer reason to pause and say, hey, no, you don't need to be here.
We didn't really see any kind of debate on this bill this week. It passed out of the Senate's Corrections and Criminal Law Committee by a unanimous vote. It was on the Senate's schedule this week, yesterday, actually, on second read with an amendment added to it, but it did not get called up. So we're still waiting to see what happens. Dustin?
All right, Emily, thank you. Nikki Kelly, this bill seems to try and get around the vague wording. If this bill passes, would these lawsuits be moot, or would they still have to play out, do you think?
I mean, they'd have to play out a little. It depends the final wording they come up with. I think they're trying to find a middle ground where, you know, if you arrive and an officer just tells everyone immediately, you're not allowed within 25 feet. No one's actually doing anything to affect their ability to do their jobs. And so part of any criminal law in Indiana is you have to know that what you're doing could cause your arrest. And so I think they're trying to make it okay for people who are literally just standing, watching, recording. But, you know, if you're in the officer's face, if you're yelling things, if you're impeding their physical ability to do their job, then they have this additional avenue.
Is it common in your experience for lawmakers to try and legislate the state out of these kinds of legal battles?
Yeah, it didn't used to be when I first came to the State House. There was sort of this unwritten, we don't get involved in lawsuits thing, but now they do it all the time. And especially in this case, I do think they're trying to find, like I said, the middle ground of giving officers a tool for when actual, you know, they're being impeded versus just a flat, no one's allowed within 25 feet and, you know, keeping people away for no apparent reason.
All right, let's head to the governor's office now. This week, Governor Mike Braun also leaned into making waves, signing multiple executive orders. Emily, let's go back to Emily at the State House here. The responses kind of depended on which order you were talking about.
Yeah, for sure. You know, we've seen when Governor Braun has signed some of these executive orders, like the one eliminating DEI from state agencies, that received a lot of pushback. And this executive order we're going to talk about right now, when he signed it Monday, he said he thought that everyone would be happy with it.
With Indiana's First Lady at his side, the governor signed an order giving women who are state employees more time to recover after childbirth.
Previously, many new mothers had to cobble together time off to recover from the physical toll of childbirth by combining maternity leave with sick days, PTO, and reduced salary while out on medical leave. We're changing that.
Under the new executive order, state employees who give birth would get 6 weeks of paid recovery leave, 8 weeks if the birth's via C-section. Right now, employees get 4 weeks across the board. That number would also stay the same for dads. The policy also applies to employees who lose a pregnancy after 20 weeks or have a stillbirth. State employees who adopt a child also qualify. Under the current policy, someone has to be with the state for at least 6 months. This executive order makes state employees' eligibility immediate, but they'd be required to work for the state at least a year after taking the paid leave.
Strong families are the cornerstone of strong communities. It's important for employers to support the needs of new parents.
Braun said the change was practicing what you preach when it comes to making Indiana a good place to raise a family and start a business.
It sets the stage for anything that might evolve down the road.
The governor said he didn't think the state would mandate how much parental leave companies give employees.
I think for the companies that are well established, it's something to aspire to.
In a media gathering after lawmakers in the House were done for the day, House Speaker Todd Houston was asked whether lawmakers in the General Assembly should consider some kind of legislation dealing with parental leave for all Hoosiers.
Well, I think it was appropriate that Governor Braun did it for state employees because that's who he has purview over. But I think, we've made it pretty clear in the past, we think that should be up to the individual employers.
Earlier this session, a bill in the Senate authored by a Democratic and Republican lawmaker called for the creation of a paid family and medical leave program that employers in the state would have contributed to. That bill did not get a hearing. Now, this particular executive order from Governor Braun received praise from across the aisle. Democratic State Representative Maureen Bauer posted on X saying that she applauded the governor's decision to include leave after a miscarriage. Dustin?
Now, there was another executive order that came from the governor's office this week, this one focusing once again on the issue of gender.
Yeah, that's right, Dustin. He signed 2 executive orders on that topic. The first one would ban transgender women and girls from playing on girls and women's sports team here in Indiana. The second executive order declares that there are only 2 genders, male and female. Governor Braun called these orders common sense. Those against these orders say that they target some of the state's most vulnerable Hoosiers.
Governor Braun signed the latest orders, joined by Elle Patterson, who says she lost a college scholarship to a transgender female athlete at San Jose State University.
That's just wrong, and leaders need to stand up for young women like Elle.
Patterson, who now plays volleyball at IUPUI, testified earlier this session in support of House Bill 1041, which bans trans women from participating in women's college sports. That bill passed the House and is now being considered by the Senate. The bill's author, Republican State Representative Michelle Davis, was there when Braun signed this latest executive order, joined by the bill's sponsor in the Senate, Republican State Senator Stacey Donato. Lawmakers on the other side of the aisle spoke out against the governor's latest executive orders.
Why aren't we doing an executive order to repeal the tax on menstrual discharge products?
Today's executive orders come after President Trump signed similar executive orders in the first 2 months after taking office. One order said there were only 2 sexes, male and female. The other withholds federal funding from any school that allows trans women to play on women's sports teams. Days later, the NCAA reversed its policy that allowed trans women to compete in collegiate women's sports. The current NCAA policy now bans them. Braun was asked if these orders were even necessary in light of the president and NCAA's actions.
This is crafted to be maybe similar to it, but it is crafted by us to address our point of view here in Indiana.
But those who work with the trans community say that view puts a target on the backs of trans folks, now making them less safe.
It's hard for a youth to hear that their government is telling other folks that they're dangerous, that they don't have a right to live their life as their authentic selves.
So for me, what this executive order basically sets up is one more excuse for people to bully and harass folks who are gender diverse.
Under Braun's second order, state agencies will only be allowed to recognize 2 genders, male and female. Until now, trans Hoosiers have been able to change their birth certificates with a court order. They will not be required to revert back to their original birth certificate. The same goes for driver's licenses that have been changed, except those licenses with an X designation, meaning neither male or female. Hoosiers with an X on their license will not be allowed to renew with that marker.
Now, per a spokesperson with the governor's office, the BMV is currently updating its websites and policies to reflect these executive orders. This spokesperson said that the BMV is in the process of sending out more than 200 letters to Hoosiers who have an X on their driver's license, letting them know that, look, they don't have to turn in their current license, but they will not be able to declare X when it comes time to renew that driver's license. Dustin?
Emily, thank you. I want to turn now to Nikki Kelly with the Capitol Chronicle. Doesn't this pretty much mirror the bill that lawmakers are considering that would ban trans women from women's college sports? These are people born male, change their sex to female. I mean, why do an executive order in addition to the bill that's already going through the House?
I mean, I think Republicans have learned that this is a popular issue with voters, and so he wants to have his say on this topic too and get his name, in the paper, and the bill will pass and it'll become state law too. But in the meantime, now there's an executive action on record.
Do you think legal challenges are sure to follow, or?
Gosh, I don't know. It didn't really work on the high school one, so probably I'm not positive on that. Usually you could say yes, but I'm not sure on that.
We'll see. All right, we'll see how that goes. On parental leave, the United States is one of 5 countries without guaranteed paid maternity leave. Indiana, like most states, does not have a program. I wonder if there's some sort of appetite now for that to change, given the governor's executive order this week.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly not an appetite for the state to provide some sort of paid leave for all Hoosiers. I think Republicans want employers to do that. They believe that is their purview, just like Governor Braun did as an employer for the state of Indiana.
Employees. Yeah. All right, Nikki, thank you. Elon Musk and Doge have been making big cuts to the federal government, and that could impact the landscape here in central Indiana. Recognize that big building downtown, the big federal buildings that could soon have a for sale sign in the front yard. And new tariffs and pauses on them filled the headlines this week. We're going to talk about how Hoosiers can keep ahead of these drastic changes. Some of them drastic, some of them not so much, but definitely making an impact. But first,
this would be the first constitutional convention that we've had in the United States since the first one in 1787 that gave us the Constitution.
Boy, this is a talker. An Indiana lawmaker wants to put term limits on his counterparts in Washington. What it would take. Next on Crossroads Politics. Welcome back. There's a new push to put a stop to career politicians in Washington, and an Indiana lawmaker is helping lead it. I talked with him about it earlier this week.
For too long, we've seen members of Congress go out there and really make a living and a career out of being a politician.
So State Senator Andy Zay wants Indiana to join the national movement to add term limits in Congress. That would require changing the U.S. Constitution. By design, no easy feat, but experts say there are two ways to do it.
The first is for Congress to propose an amendment that the states then have to ratify. Now, with congressional term limits, everybody assumes that Congress will never propose an amendment that limits their own terms.
Which brings us to the second option. Instead of Congress amending the Constitution for the states to approve, the states could initiate the change through a constitutional convention. But to hold that convention, at least 34 state legislatures would need to sign on.
Basically, this would be the first constitutional convention that we've had in the United States since the first one in 1787 that gave us the Constitution.
And that's what Senator Zay is aiming to do. He knows it's an uphill battle.
This is a big process. We are kind of in the infancy. I think we're looking at about 10 to 12 states right now, somewhere in there. Many more considering this.
Those against term limits insist stability in Congress is critical. But what about that side of things, that the constant turnaround would actually be helpful?
I couldn't agree more, but 40 and 50 years of service gets a little beyond stability.
It seems fascinating to me that we are at a time in our nation's history where this is being discussed. They've got about a dozen states that are, if not on board, considering this.
You can get 12 states to sign on to a lot of things. Getting 30, which would get you close to the 2/3 that you need, that's a lot harder.
But a good way, he says, to get us all talking.
You know, I don't think democracy is going to go anywhere, but I think we need to get back to, the original design and intent of, our founding fathers, and that is for us to be citizen legislators.
All right, Nikki, so will we see this Senate joint resolution go anywhere?
I mean, I think it'll pass Indiana, but in terms of getting all 34 states on board, I doubt it. And the fact is, there's a lot of reasons why, and there was a fascinating discussion on the Senate floor about it. There's this big concern about what's called a runaway convention. Yeah. Once you open up a constitutional convention, you can say it's only on term limits, but how do you actually stop it once you're in there?
You could make changes to
Second Amendment,
right.
First Amendment, whatever. And so then there was also a fascinating talk from several lawmakers in the Senate who said they felt like hypocrites sitting there determining term limits for the feds when they don't have them for state lawmakers.
Right. And I asked Senator Zay about that, and he said, well, we're a little bit different because we're only here a couple of months. We go back on the weekends, sometimes on the weeknights. We hear from our constituents directly. So he argues back a little bit about that, but it's definitely an argument. You've covered this at the Capitol Chronicle. What do our members of Congress think about this idea? Have you looked into that?
They've been pretty quiet about it. We reached out to a few and didn't really get responses. I think there are probably several Republicans who would be on board for it. Even though they're serving longer terms, they're still not at 40 to 50 years. I think Senator Banks even had a tweet that sort of talked about a fellow member who had been there for a very long time. And so I think some of them would be on board for it.
All right, Nikki, thank you. President Trump's administration may be selling 2 large federal buildings here in Marion County. One located downtown Indianapolis, the other is in Lawrence, a massive building on the former Fort Bend campus, second in size only to the Pentagon, we learned this week. Rich Nye talked to a nearby restaurant owner who's concerned about what the sale of the Bean Center would mean not just for his business, but for all of Lawrence.
The Major General Emmett J. Bean Federal Center in Lawrence is second in size among federal buildings to only the Pentagon. This is where payroll is processed for all of the U.S. military, but at least 14 agencies have offices here. The Bean Center is on a list published Tuesday of more than 400 federal facilities nationwide labeled as non-core assets for disposal. From the entrance of Paya Thai Street Food, you can look across 56th Street and see the massive facility.
Employees come and have dining with us constantly at lunchtime, and before they go home, they do come stop by and pick up the to go.
Owner Montri Sangsuwangul has lived in Lawrence 40 years and opened the restaurant with his wife 8 years ago. He says he would lose customers and Lawrence would likely lose residents if the Bean Center was sold.
Definitely it will impact, all through our business and also the housing around here.
Also listed for possible sale is the Minton Capehart Federal Building on Pennsylvania Street in downtown Indy.
The federal government website lists the Department of Veteran Affairs, the Social Security Administration, and the Internal Revenue Service as the primary tenants here at the Minton Capehart Federal Building. But there are others, including 7 new immigration courts that just opened here in January.
Workers here would not talk on camera, but said they are nervous. So is Montri in Lawrence.
I hope things can work out. It's a good facility, very, very good location, everything. I hope that they do reconsider and think real hard, maybe organize a little bit.
Rich Nye, 13 News.
We'll continue to follow that, see where it goes. Also this week, President Trump implemented 25% additional tariffs on imports from Canada and Mexico and a 10% additional tariff on imports from China. Here's the president on the importance of his strategy.
Tariffs are about making America rich again and making America great again. There'll be a little disturbance, but we're okay with that.
Then on Thursday, he announced delays on some of those tariffs on Mexico and Canada for another month. So what does this disturbance mean for your wallet? Allison Gormley tells us what's the deal.
The tariffs or taxes are paid by the American businesses importing the goods. So the short-term impact of the added costs are very likely going to mean higher prices for us. Categories most likely to see a hit sooner rather than later include food, gas, clothing, luxury jewelry, electronics, cosmetics, and new homes. Now, tariffs will impact new transactions moving forward. That means if you're expecting to make a big purchase, like a renovation or a new house, understand what you're agreeing to price-wise.
As a consumer, if you hear from a seller or a builder, we don't know the prices might increase, then you should really build that into your budget. Because if it's not set in stone, the prices very well could increase.
On the contrary, if you sign a binding contract and agree on a price, that should not change. Allison Gormley, 13 News.
Good to know. Just as they did in 2016, President Trump's tariffs are once again putting farmers front and center in this looming trade war. So how will this impact agriculture and farming? Of course, that's huge here in Indiana. Take a look at these numbers. Indiana alone exported $56 billion in goods to foreign markets in 2023, and much of what we export is agricultural. $7.4 billion in 2022, according to the USDA. A lot of that corn and soybeans. And look at this, our top 3 trading partners are Canada, Mexico, and China, but all 3 now threatening retaliatory tariffs of their own. China, for example, saying it's going to impose up to 15% on U.S. farm products, including soybeans and corn. The National Farmers Union told me it doesn't think this tariff strategy is going to work.
Agriculture and American family farmers are going to be the first to feel the impact of these tariffs.
And how might they feel that? How will we feel that?
Back in 2018, when this happened before, China stopped buying soybeans and some other products from the U.S., and that had a pretty immediate impact on soybean prices and really scrambled the board when it comes to our soybean exports. Farmers spent decades trying to build up export markets for soybeans and other agricultural products, and those went away practically overnight. And that opened the door for our competitors in agriculture, particularly Brazil and maybe Argentina too. China started buying from them and investing in infrastructure in Brazil and South America and other places. So the impacts are felt widely when these sorts of tariffs come into effect, and I expect we'll see similar shifts in the weeks and months ahead here too.
Now, another concern is that farmers would end up paying more for fertilizers for their crops, potash in particular. Much of that comes from Canada, so that would be more expensive if Canada retaliates with its own tariffs, which they said they would do. I also spoke with a U.S. representative from here in central Indiana, Congressman Andre Carson, a Democrat representing most of Indianapolis, about the tariffs and their potential impact on all of us here. Here's what he told me.
President Trump delayed tariffs until April the 2nd. That's a good sign that the pressure we are putting on this administration is working. President Trump, he tried tariffs in 2018. They didn't work. They raised prices for consumers. There's no reason for us to believe it will be different a second time around. And that's what will happen again. President Trump's tariffs will cost working families up to about $4,000 a year. And, we're raising the alarm with the president and his administration that these tariffs will devastate Americans already struggling with high prices. They're going to kill jobs. Plus, they will hurt our diplomatic relationships with some of our closest partners. Retaliatory tariffs from Canada in particular will hit Indiana hard. It'll hit the Midwest hard. So Democrats, we're going to keep stepping up and to be the party of reason and the party of good governance.
I'm reading a tweet from Representative Stutzman from Northern Indiana on Wednesday. He said Trump's tariffs are bringing jobs back to the crossroads of America. Mentioned reports that there's an increase in vehicle manufacturing. Do you think there is any sort of advantage, though, to this tariff strategy?
Well, I think we have to look at ways to lower costs and strengthen the middle class. Tariffs will only increase the price of goods that we get from our trade partners. I think President Trump's right in that he wants to incent American-based companies, particularly auto manufacturers, to build products in the U.S. because it will grow the economy. Anything outside of that, I think, is damaging to our global relationships.
We reached out to both of Indiana's senators as well as the Republican representatives with districts here in central Indiana. They either did not respond yet or declined an interview. And that does it for this week's episode of Crossroads Politics. We're going to be here every Sunday for the rest of the legislative session at 10 a.m. here on WTHR+. For Emily Longnecker and Nikki Kelly, I'm Dustin Grove. Thanks for watching. We hope to see you next time.